I was just actually telling Loki, I've given this talk actually at a bunch of places, in most of the NASA centers and whatever, but I realize I've never given it at MIT for whatever reason. So, so you all know this is about crashing the 7.7. Yeah. Which some of you have probably seen on TV. In the U.S., this was shown as a Discovery Channel show in whatever. But I'm going to sort of give you the backstory and sort of how it happened and a bunch of things that you didn't expect. So one of the things about being an MIT professor is you occasionally get weird calls from people. Okay. So a number of years ago, I got a call from these guys from London, from this Dragonfly production. And they said, well, you know, we're thinking about pitching this series on big science. And we want to do big experiments and things like that and whatever. And we have this idea of crashing, you know, getting an airplane and then flying with remote control. And they'd actually been talking to the guys in China Lake, who in China Lake at the time they were flying these target drones for the Navy, these QF-4s. Okay, it's a remotely controlled. And these guys had said, well, you know, we could put this stuff on a commercial airplane and you can buy one cheap and we can crash it and you know, have really good video and it'll be really cool and whatever. And I told them, I said, like, okay, wait a minute. You guys know that this was done by NASA 10 years ago, right, in the 70s. And it took them about 3 years to do. And I'll show you some stuff about what they were going to do. In fact, I'm going to show you here. So what this was supposed to be was a controlled demonstration of a special fuel additive which was anti-misting fuel. So it was supposed to prevent fires after, right? And the plan was so that they're going to, this was actually a 707, or not, it was one of the prototypes. And basically, they were going to do this controlled crash. And in fact, there's a video from the show. So I'm going to show the video, and then we can pick it up. Okay, which by the way took 4 years to develop this and plan this. It cost $20 million, took $40 million.
In 1984, NASA spent millions of dollars crashing a plane in the California desert. These images of the event show how difficult it is to safely crash a passenger jet. 60 times, they lost control on final approach.
When they crashed, instead of shearing the wings off between the engine and the fuselage, they actually cut right through the engine.
They were supposed to puncture the tanks and that, so. It was not considered as a successful test. So I told these guys that this was going to be this is going to be really expensive. It was really hard technically. It was much more difficult than what you do. So I totally dissed on the guy and discouraged the guy, right? So he calls me up 3 months later. He says, "Well, we're going to do it. We got the money. They got funding from BBC. They got funding from National Geographic. They got funding from a German network to do this thing." So I said, okay. So then the original plan was to go out and buy an airplane. So we went to the aircraft boneyards looking for an airplane. And the airplane that we wanted was an L-1011. Okay, turns out it was really big and it's cheap, right? Because people weren't flying and say it's actually a pretty good airplane. The problem is, and I'll get into a little bit more about how we did it, is that it turned out the way we did the remote control was really simple. And so you actually couldn't do the remote control for takeoff. You actually had to have a crew launch the airplane and take it off, okay? And then the strategy was you were going to then have the crew bail out before you did the crash, okay? And the problem with L-1011 is the doors, okay, are all lined up in front of the tail, so you can't safely bail out of an L-1011. Right? In fact, has anybody ever flown on the NASA KC-135 that used to do the zero-G airplanes or whatever? So the KC-135s, the military, which were the tankers, they were 707s. they actually had a special bailout zone. So you would actually, when you went into the airplane, you went in through the belly in the door, and that was because if you had to bail out, you could bail out the bottom and get clear of the airplane. Okay. So the airplane we ended up going after was a 727. And the reason why is 727s were designed with a rear air stair. Okay, so you can open up the air stair and then you can go out the back of the airplane cleanly and you can get out. Okay, right. So that was good. And they're also, you know, it wasn't as big, but it was kind of okay. There. Now it's actually interesting. A little side note here. We were not the first people to bail out of a 727. Okay, does anybody know why the 727 is famous for bailouts? Okay, so D.B. Cooper. Okay, so there's a back in the what was it? Does anybody remember when? Okay, a long time ago, this guy I guess robbed a bank and then hijacked an airplane. Got given a parachute and then bailed out. You got open on a 727. Got them to open up the back door and went out the back of a 727 somewhere over western Washington or over Washington State or whatever. It has never been heard from again. Okay. Okay. So it turns out all 727s are now equipped with something called the D.B. Cooper lock. Okay. So this is an aerodynamic lock that prevents you from being able to open the door. Okay, when the airplane is in flight. Okay. So we had to disable the lock. Okay. So this thing is going on, and we're deciding to. And they came to me and they like, okay, so what's the science you can do on it? And so we started talking about getting really good filming of crash dynamics and what happens inside the airplane, and you can use it for training. I mean, we would learn some things about it. It wasn't as interesting as it might have been technically because, you know, it would be interesting to look at the structural failure modes, and we'll talk about those. But, but you know, we sort of understand aluminum airplanes. It would have been much more interesting to crash like a 787. Okay, 787 is really expensive. And so you know, when Boeing heard about this, like the Boeing guys came to me and they said, "What the hell's going on?" Right? Okay. I said, "Well, you know, it's the cool thing." In fact, the CTO of Boeing, after we did the crash, said that was really cool. He wished it, but at the time they were a little bit nervous about it. Now, when we got the airplane, so we ended up buying an airplane. This airplane, whatever the serial number is. This actually turns out it was in Texas. We bought it in Texas. It had been George Bush's campaign airplane, okay, when he was campaigning, okay. So we bought it in Texas and ferried it to Los Angeles. Oh, well, okay, so I'll come back in a minute to the ferry. We also needed, so we had an airplane, and then we needed a place to crash, okay. So again, the guys that had worked on the flight control stuff were from China Lake. And so we could get into China Lake, but it would be like 3 years to get the approval processes and whatever. Yeah.
Roughly how much was the 727, and was it still an annual when you bought it?
I will get to the airworthiness in a minute. Okay. I can't remember how much it was, you know, maybe less than $1 million. And then we also bought ratted out engines, okay, because you know, the engines are worth a lot of money too, and so in fact on the test flights it was like, okay, are we going to keep this thing going long enough to do it? Okay, but we needed a site, and so we decided we could go to China Lake. So they looked around, and we ended up finding a test site in Mexicali, okay, which is just south of the U.S. border, not that far away from San Diego, okay. There. Just a little side note, at the time, it was still a pretty dangerous place. So one of the things is, you know, when I got to do it, and this is all done by the TV thing, so the production company comes to me, and I had to sign a contract in the production company. And so one of the questions there was, like, you know, there are all these, I mean, do you join the union and things like that, but do you also, there are all these things about the hazards of going into, you know, Mexico at that time and whatever the pressure. It turned out it was no big deal, but there were all these things that were there. Now, what we found was this dry lake in Mexicali, which is a lot like Edwards, sort of similar thing, okay? And it turns out that the Mexicans were okay with us going there, okay? We had to pay for it, and we had to agree to clean up the site after we crashed the airplane. In fact, there was a requirement on what we had to do there. So that was good. So we bought the airplane. We ferried it to LA to a shop that does recondition on a ferry permit, so we could get an experimental airworthiness certificate. So we fly it in our experimental category. Okay. And everything was going fine. Okay. So this was like we were starting to instrument the airplane, or whatever. And the associate administrator at the FAA said, "What the hell is going on here?" And they heard of it. The FAA heard about this one with the thing. And the FAA basically put a stop to the project. They said, you can't take an airplane in experimental category. They were really nervous about crashing it, and I ended up being in a bunch of discussions with them. And basically, the project went on hold for about a year, because the FAA wouldn't give them an airworthiness certificate to fly the airplane to Mexico and whatever. Part of the argument is you can't be an experimental certificate and go across a border, theoretically, which I think is not true, but that's part of the argument that they were making. So they were basically, and this is in part because of the disaster of the NASA thing, so they didn't want that. And they're like, why are you going to do this, and are you going to give safety a bad name, and whatever, and they went through this whole thing. So from my standpoint, like, the project ended. It's like, okay, I told you guys it's going to be hard, it's over. And about 8 months or maybe 10 months or a year later, I get the call from these guys saying, we worked it out with the FAA, we're gonna do it in 3 weeks, can you be in Mexico in 3 weeks? Okay. Okay. That's right. So we got approval to get a ferry, so they worked out a deal, okay, so they could ferry the airplane, take another ferry permit, ferry it to Mexico, deregister the airplane from the U.S., register it in Mexico, and the Mexicans didn't care. Okay. So we did that. So like on short notice, I get the words like, go to Mexicali. So we went to the Mexicali airport, okay. This is the airplane there. It's really hot in Mexicali, okay. And we started the thing. So this is kind of gives you a sense for what the place was like. I was on what we call the science. So the way this thing got set up, okay, is there was a science team. So there's myself. There's Tom Barth, who had been with the MTSB and been an investigator for the MTSB. Cindy Burr, who is an expert on basically biomechanics of injury. This is a woman who spent her sabbatical in the LA morgue. Okay, right. So she's kind of a weird cat. That's all right. And then Ann Evans, who had been an investigator for the British, and she had investigated actually a very similar accident to this profile we ended up flying, which was a 777. I think people are familiar with it, the engine icing incident where they ended up landing short there. So we were doing this, and I'll get into what we did in terms of instrumenting the airplane and things like that. But it turns out that everywhere you went, you were followed around by a camera team. Okay, and you're not allowed to do anything unless they were ready to film you to do it. Okay, so it's a real, real pain. And this was, and then on the flight crew, you had this guy Jerry was a flight engineer. This is Jim Bob Skocum, and I'll run some tape that we'll talk about. Tell you a little bit about why he was there. He was a FedEx pilot. He had flown 727s for FedEx, all right, and then done a bunch of other stuff. There's another guy there, and there was also a team which we've done pictures of the guys from China Lake who did. We'll have some. Things on that, but let me just run a little film on. Come on, guys. Sorry, guys.
So one of those dudes you have to drag over?
I don't know what happened. I was trying to start the. Let's go.
Yeah, I think you get a second. Oh, because it's part of your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I think the problem, I gotta break out of it. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Just gonna happen again.
Okay, great.
Jim Rock isn't chosen for his 30 years in the cockpit or for surviving 3 plane crashes. Parachuting happened.
So this guy was a crazy one. He had jumped out of, he was a master parachutist, which is really the reason why they were doing it, and I'll get into there, and he's willing to do that stuff. So one of the interesting parts of the experience is this was actually one of the most technically complicated real-time TV, or not real-time, but real-world TV shows that's done. So we're in this hotel. There are 150 people, right? The prep for the thing, we had a crash window that I can't remember the exact time, but it was within a certain window we had to go. So we get the airplane, we had to get it ready, we had to crash it. So one of the things that happened is that there are all these showrunners that are scheduling everything. So everything you did had to be scheduled, and every morning you would get a call sheet that would tell you, okay, go to the airport at this time. You're going to put instrumentation or dummies on the airplane, and they're sort of filming all this stuff and trying to script it. And when these things happen, they don't really know what's going to happen. But it was an interesting experience. I also found out that Mexicali is the Chinese food capital of Mexico. It turns out there's a huge Mexican or Chinese population in so one of the things that we were doing on the science side, particularly with Cindy, was to have instrumented dummies. Okay, so it turns out one of the things I didn't know, okay, is instrumented dummies are not cheap. Okay, so they cost. How much do you want to guess? How much a dummy costs?
50 grand?
No. Okay. It costs about 200 to 300 grand. Okay. When they're fully instrumented. Okay. So it turns out you don't buy them, you rent them. Okay. Okay. But of course, when you're going to crash the airplane, one of the questions is, are they going to burn? Okay. So we had to buy insurance on the dummies. Right. Okay. So and we could only afford 3. Okay. So we didn't fill the airplanes. So we actually had three expensive dummies. This is a mass dummy here. I mean, we had actually a bunch of dummies of different types. We even looked at having one, which we didn't end up flying, that had that had simulated organs, so you could look at organ, dynamics during the crash. We did not do that. Okay. So we had to go ahead.
Did you put any of the dummies in the brace position?
Yeah, so that's what we actually ended up doing is in the protocol, and I'll show you a picture later. We had one that was in the brace position, and the seat behind them we had someone who was not in the brace position. So that was actually one of the things we could validate. And then what we had is we had 2 dummies up front, and we had 1 dummy in the back. We also had a whole series of accelerometers and load cells that went along, so you could actually see the dynamics there. So yeah, so here's the setup. So this was the brace position dummy, and here's the nominal dummy. One of the other things to know is that there's a little teddy bear in this guy's that we put in there. I'll come back to the story about that if I remember later. Okay, and so so we also installed a whole series of cameras. Okay, and this is actually when GoPros were pretty new. Okay, so we put this was a GoPro. We put some high. These cameras were the high rep rate cameras, so you could look at sort of dynamic slow motion cameras in the crash. And then we put a whole series of GoPros in there. We actually had to create fireproof boxes for the GoPros because we weren't sure whether we were going to burn or not. Do this. We didn't. and remember, this thing was all thrown together in about a month. Okay, so when we got the green light to go, suddenly it's like, you gotta do this. So, so this was sort of snapped together. This is the data acquisition package for the dummies. And again, flew in the airplane. We didn't have telemetry, so again, we were concerned if the airplane burned. This is the installation of the accelerometer data acquisition system. So we had accelerometers all through the airplane. There was a lot of filming of the sort of setup and things like that. The design protocol for the accident was it was a landing configuration, landing short of the runway. Okay, so at basically typical landing speed, but the vertical rate was designed to be at the limit of human survivability, right? So we were trying to, we didn't want to rip the thing. I mean, it wouldn't be interesting to dive it straight in the ground. Okay, so we wanted to do something. So we did this. This is filming on the inside of the airplane, and let me tell you, it was hot on the inside of the airplane when you're doing installation. We did a dry run. I flew in the dry run to go through the protocol. So this was the day before we were scheduled to crash, or maybe 2 days before. So we're all set up. We're filming this. The protocol, okay, was here. So we flew. This was carefully designed. So you flew a downwind leg. Okay. On the downwind leg, the flight engineer and first officer would bail out. Okay. And the captain would then hand fly the rest of the procedure. You get lined up on final. Okay. And on final, they would set the autopilot. And then there was, and we'll get into the remote control, but there were only three controls. There was a pitch control, a roll control, and there was one throttle control. Okay. So what we did, and part of the reason why we landed this way, and it doesn't show, but there was a painted runway on the desert that I'll talk about in a minute. But you're flying into a valley. Okay. So one of the concerns was that the airplane goes rogue, because you had to have enough gas to get back to the, if you boarded to get back to the airport. So if the airplane went rogue, you had to make sure that it wasn't going to hurt anybody. So when we committed to the final landing, we would put the number 1 and 3 engines in idle position, and they were mechanically locked out. And there's only the number 2, the middle engine, was the one that was actually controllable. Okay. And then so it was essentially on a glide path. Once that was set up and it was going down into this valley behind the dry leg, then Jim Bob would come to the back and he would bail out. Okay, so they did a dry run. These are the jump masters. Okay, so there were 3 jump masters who went out, and the first officer, flight engineer, went out on a tandem rig. So they basically just went out with the guys. Again, because Jim Bob was a master parachuter, he went out solo. But on the actual run, the guy in the orange jumpsuit here actually stayed with him. So in case he got incapacitated or something, there had to be somebody there to get them out. And they stayed out, and also this guy did filming on the way out, so that was part of the film protocol. And you'll see the in detail there. Yeah.
What were the bailout altitudes, AGL, roughly?
About 1,700. Right. And I got to tell you, so on the dry run, the crew did not bail out. Okay, so the guys surrogates went out. Okay, and I can't remember, was the real event or the dry run. The guys that went out, I think it was in the dry run. The guys that went out early. Okay. And they went out a hell of a lot further away than they were expected to, so they ended up in the middle of the desert. And it took like 5 hours to find the guys. So they were missing, for a while. Okay. So this is actually a picture. If I had pushed harder, I actually would have gotten a chance to be on this. So this is going out the back. This is actually looking, out the door, right? So these guys had just jumped. I think this is on the downwind leg here. In terms of the flight control systems, they have to say the China Lake guys were not, they're a bunch of old fighter pilots and not real technicians, okay? So this is the way we install the servos. So these are, if you take the floor out of a 727, these are actually the cable runs back to the control surfaces, okay? So we had these big honking servos, okay, that would just dial in and would move, you know, the aileron cable and the elevator cable to do that, and the throttle cables back to the thing. The problem is that and literally this was flown with an RC, you know, flight controller. The rocket scientists who did this, and were partly because of the rush, did not put an antenna on the outside of the airplane. Okay, so there's a little RC receiver inside. So in order to control the airplane, you had to be within about 300 feet or 200 feet of the airplane in order for the RC signal to get through. Okay.
Verify transmitter gauge switch is on.
Okay. So this is on the driver. So we flew initially with the 337.
We have a very limited range, so we actually have to be very, very close in order to maintain control. If he pulls too far away, then the radio will no longer control.
Speed. Big flow is too fast for the chase plane. The struggles to stay in range. If Chip can't take control of big flow, the whole mission will have to be scrapped.
They try to make it as dramatic as possible, but it actually it was a problem. So we had this airplane, and literally the 337 could not keep up with even as slow as you can. So they called up, and somebody knew somebody in LA who had a Marchetti. Okay, so they flew a Marchetti down there, and then we did drive, and the Marchetti had no trouble keeping up with the airplane. The problem is that on the day when we're actually going to crash, you know, everything's ready, everybody's all things, and the Marchetti comes up with a fuel leak or the oil leak. Okay, and they grounded the airplane. So they ended up using the 337, you know, trying to chase down the airplane in the actual crash. Okay, so we did this stuff in the impact scene now, you know, like the Mexicali Fire Department, you know, all my buddies. I'll get it back.
Did the force footing, you just hit escape?
I could try. I did it last time. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's
Good. Yeah, there we go. Okay, all right. Say, okay. So here are my buddies from the Mexicali Fire Rescue Department. So these guys all had to be ready, and you know, in whatever. As I said, we put a runway out on the field, and if they had done it correctly, so on the runway we then had cameras mounted at 360 degrees. So there were about 30 cameras in the desert aimed at the impact point. Okay. So if, you know, and the guys did not hit the impact point. If they had hit the impact point the way they were supposed to, you would have had this amazing footage. And they didn't quite hit the target. We unfortunately, because of that, we did put on a chase helicopter. So we had a chase helicopter that was flying chase, and a lot of the good video of the crash actually comes from the chase helicopter. Okay, so this is the actual crash. Okay, so this is from the film. This is, the other guys are out. This is 9 with 3,600 feet on descent. He leaves the cockpit. The thing I want to note here is, remember he was a FedEx pilot? Okay, right? So you noticed the soccer ball? Okay, right. So they might ever see the movie with that. Castaway, right? Okay. So these guys did this, and I got to tell you, okay, this was, the crew did this. The showrunners were so pissed off when they saw this film, because there's, like, it was not, they weren't supposed to do it, and there's no way, you know, I mean, you can't replicate the film, right? So they were stuck with this beach ball, and we had to deal with that. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me try to start this without. Whoa. Okay, so he gets out of the cockpit.
From big flow.
This film is from the helmet cam of the government. They're out in the middle of nowhere. Okay. So as part of the whole thing, we got to be at the closest location you could be to the crash site. So we were about a mile away, here, so you could sort of see the crash, and we're on this little hill here. Okay, so this is
727 is about to crash.
You can see the runway. Now you'll notice there's all this smoke, dust.
Look at.
Oh, wow.
We're about double thousand shot. The most spectacular thing I've ever seen in my life.
It's a remarkable sight.
The nose buckled under the fuselage.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. So, you see the skeleton that looks like do we have a fire now? So we were concerned, we remember, we're worried about a fire, right? Because if it burns, we lose all the thing. And the initial dust plume is this brown dust, and then suddenly there was darker dust. And if anybody's ever seen an airplane crash, it turns out airplane fuel fires are normally fairly black. So it looked like a fuel fire, okay? It turns out, something else was going on, okay? That the engine, number 2 engine did not quit. Okay, so the engine was blowing and it was digging down into the dirt and then blowing darker dirt up there, right? Okay, so we figured that out. Now we're like, okay, what do we do? Okay. Remember we had like an hour and a half's worth of gas on the airplane. Probably longer than idle. So it's like, right? So we actually said, okay, well, it's dangerous. We'll let it run out of gas. So we did that for about half an hour, and then we started worrying about like, shit. Okay, it's really hot. Are the stuff gonna burn? So we ended up sending in the fire department, and they basically shot water into the engines and shut down the engines by flooding them with water. Right. So we got that done. Okay. There was a bunch of like security guys to make sure nobody was in the crash zone. So this is the interior view of the impact. So what you do see is the vertical impact drops there's a lot of stuff came down, and then you can see why they tell you to look where your exit is before you leave the airplane, right? Okay. So in this case, the dust was all into the thing, so the visibility within the cabin was there. When we got to the thing, there was a tire mark, okay? Then some of you guys may have seen this. So what happened, in fact, we didn't really talk about what happened structurally. So when the airplane hit, okay, it was going to soft ground. The landing gear all went in, dug in, and immediately failed. Okay, so the nose gear failed and the two main gear failed. The nose gear failed back under the belly and created a buckle under the belly of the airplane. As it scrubbed along the ground, and I'll play it again so you can see it, what then happened is it started to pull down, and there was a slight rotation. We then had a tear at the forward left entry door corner, which is a stress concentration point. That caused the rip, and basically the front fuselage just ripped off and rolled away. Okay. The main gear, one of them broke off and remained attached by the hydraulic lines, okay, brake lines, and then it swung around behind the airplane, okay, and then basically got slingshotted in front of the airplane. So as the airplane slid along, it then ran into the landing gear, which is why it started to rotate to the right. So I think let me play this. I think you can see it here, yeah. So you can see the landing gear coming forward, bouncing. And you can see that jams and causes the airplane to skid around to the right. Here's a picture from the window, right? So there's a wind camera, and you probably didn't see it, but the wheel went by, right? And then you can sort of see what's happening out in the wind. Okay. So once we finally got clear, once the engine got put down, we sort of approached the debris field, and then we're supposed to do this sort of analysis of what the dynamics of what happened here. And then this was before we had any of the film, so this is approaching out to the site. This is what it looked like. So here on the left is the cockpit. It's inverted. This is a life raft. This is sort of just debris that had been strewn out of the airplane. Interestingly, I used to work on, do you guys know what enhanced ground proximity warning is, or TOS? I worked on the original enhanced ground proximity warning system. It turns out that the EGPWS box was sitting out here on the thing, and it turns out I learned this from the exhibition. Everybody always takes a souvenir, right? So in my office, I have the EGPWS from that, from this rack here, and it's like, nobody was going to use it afterwards. Okay. Okay. So one of the avionics, this is just the debris field. This is the nose wheel. You can actually see the markings of this nose wheel had just tumbled for 500 feet, just kind of rocking there, and ended up there. By the way, you can see the failure, right? Of the nose wheel, and this nose wheel castings are really strong. Okay, so this was a lot of load on this. We had marked the seats, so you could see that you did not want it to be in seat 7A. Okay, right. And in fact, we think because the cockpit remained intact, that the cockpit was probably at least the physical envelope was intact, was probably survivable. Okay, the seats you didn't want to be in first class. Okay, were probably not. Okay, this is the main fuselage. You can see the landing gear here, and was relatively intact. This was the cockpit, sort of on its side. We had added a special quick access recorder, flight data recorder, in the system. So I actually had to go in, this is part of the whole film thing, to then do the retrieval of both the cameras and the in the flight data recorder, right? So, all right, so that was one of the cameras, or that was actually the flight data recorder. That was the cameras there. This is the cockpit view of the impact. Okay. We gotta go back. Just get a sense of it again. So when I told you these dummies were really expensive. So we had to figure out where we put them. I think we put them in row 9. Okay. And it turns out, we were incredibly lucky. Okay? This is the rip line, right? And you're looking in the front of the ripped out airplane. And this is literally where it ripped, okay? And you can see the foot of the front dummy was sitting on the edge of the line. Okay. That was really lucky. Again, you can see this is the foot. There was partial structure there, so you can see one of the other mass dummies there. This is the, I don't know if you can see it here. So this is the crash position, was found to be effective. So we had painted, so can you see here? So you could see, I think this was the dummy that went forward. So you could see the yellow, there are impact marks, so probably would have been traumatic based on the analysis afterwards. We had some, we had a dummy without a seatbelt, okay, a mass dummy without a seatbelt, and they submarined under the seat in front. Okay, so you do want to wear your seatbelt? Okay. This actually shows you data from the accelerometers, and it's obviously hacked up, but showing you the, you can see the timing of the impact force propagate down the thing, and you can also see that the longitudinal G's actually were reduced as you went further back on the airplane, right? Which was interesting. Okay, okay. This is major reading. Yeah, so the instrumentation in the back was lower peak load and so it is, as long as you hit this way, it is safer to sit in the back of the airplane. Okay, right. So this is looking from the back forward. You can see, that the dimensions there. Oh, I wanted to go back to the dummies. Okay, so we crashed, and go through the whole thing and did some initial filming, and then we had to leave for the night. Okay, we couldn't film at night. We'd come back. We had like 18 hours to get all the filming done before we go. So we leave the Mexicali police and fire department there guarding the airplane overnight. Okay, right. When we come back in the morning, okay, and the teddy bear that was in the lap of the number 2 dummy suddenly wasn't there the next morning. So some Mexicali policeman's kid got the teddy bear that went for the ride. Okay. So here's the rear instrumented dummy. Again, here's the recreating the exterior. And then, and this is not, accidents like this still keep happening. So this is Asiana 214 in San Francisco. In this case, for a variety of reasons, they screwed up the approach. Ended up impacting short. They impacted, the tail just hit this seawall here. You can see parts of the debris field from the airplane. The airplane then sort of skidded off to the side in a sort of similar kind of dynamics. In this case, there was a fire. The airplane burned. You can see here, but everybody, most of the people were able to evacuate in this case. There were, as you probably know, several people killed who were actually run over by the fire engine that was responding. Okay, so that's it. So any questions or? Yeah.
So should you, if you know you're gonna crash, should you land geared up or geared down then?
Depends actually on the condition, right? In soft ground like this, the landing gear will break off. Okay, I don't think that particularly necessarily degrades it, but it does. So in soft ground, it may make more sense to do gear up. In certain cases, for example, like certain water landings, it makes sense to go gear up. One interesting thing, this is just an anecdote from glider flying. So we raise gliders, and occasionally you'll have to land in the water. And you think you want to land near the shore. Okay, you actually have to be really careful because at least on sailplanes, what will happen is because of their shape, they'll actually duck into the water and they'll dive down about 8 feet before they come back up. So that if you're near the shore, what they'll do is they'll pitch you down into the rocks. So you actually want to ditch a little bit away from shore, and the airplane will actually, there's enough air in it, it will recover buoyantly, and then you'll get up and do that. So, yeah.
The crash was in 2012, but when did the show, when was the show aired?
The show aired about 6 months later, okay, and it aired. It was interesting because it was, remember, it was sold to different. By the way, you know, originally it was funded by National Geographic. They sold their position to Discovery. Okay, so it was Discovery in the U.S. It was BBC 4 in the UK. It was in the German thing, and then it was in distribution around the world. So for about 2 years, every once in a while, you know, somebody would like run into you, and they had seen the crash thing, or whatever. And you know, it's the kind of thing that it's not. They resurface it every once in a while because it's, you know, it's one of those things that they can still do. So, other question? Yeah.
So you said that the number 2 engine didn't quit, right? Which is quite alarming in like real life. Where I mean, are there any like G sensors which kind of cut off the fuel lines if the G force exceeds something? Or like, I mean, that's quite possible in an actual crash as well. Where
Yeah, no, it's actually not that unusual to have engines continue to run after a sort of semi, you know, impact like this, right? So it's, I mean, it's not, it wouldn't have prevented people from evacuating from the airplane, right? And it actually doesn't probably change the likelihood of a fire that much. The concern on fire actually is if you break the fuel tanks and you have fuel spread all over is where you tend to get the fires occurring. Yeah. Go you first now. Yeah.
Quick question on like the actual the hitting the X mark itself.
Yeah.
So you did a video that said that they were maybe like 1,000 feet short. 3,000 feet short. was that due to like a failure in the remote control? Failure in
Okay, so this was totally hacked together system. Okay, right. So these guys are flying it with an RC thing. This guy, this fighter pilot, whatever, was flying the right seat, trying to keep up with him. His only job was to basically pull the engine to idle at the right time. Okay, so he was supposed to be flying and getting it lined up, and at the right time pull it to idle to get the thing. He got nervous and pulled it to idle too early, right? And I got to tell you, do you guys know what a showrunner is? Okay, in TV production, there's somebody who's called a showrunner who's actually the boss, runs the whole thing. So there was a showrunner for Discovery, and he was kind of getting everything going. And when they missed the mark, you know, I was all like, hey, you know, the airplane didn't burn, this is great, and whatever. And this guy was ripping. He was like so pissed off that they had missed the spot. Okay. I mean, because the video, I mean, it would have been, you know, they would have been like award-winning video if they'd gotten it, because it was one of these. They could have done a 360-degree dynamic reconstruction of the accident, and they didn't. You know, they missed it. Right? So, yeah.
What would you do differently if you were to do it again?
I mean, I did it as a hack. It was just fun. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so that's what I'm saying. So the CTO of Boeing said, okay, that must have been a blast to go. Because it's like, someone, they actually didn't pay me. I didn't take any money. But someone says, hey, come for a week-long vacation in Mexico, drink beer every night, and crash airplanes during the day, right? It's like, okay, we can do this. You know, it was fun. I would say the real science was pretty weak. It was really more a TV stunt thing. But not to say that wasn't fun, yeah.
Did you learn anything unexpected from it?
Yeah, I think that not a lot unexpected. It really validated, like the crash position works, right? Put your seatbelt on the submarine, but, you know, on the deceleration. And we didn't see failures. I mean, the failures we saw were very explainable, so we understood the dynamics, and they're kind of things that you had seen before. I think that the things, it sort of confirmed stuff and gave you visual evidence of things. Like I said, the thing that was really unique about this is the number of cameras both inside the airplane and outside the airplane to see what went on in reality. I think things like when you see the cockpit filled with dust, right? You know, you all say, okay, the visibility is going to be bad. So, you know, they show that film to flight attendants in training, right? Because it's like, okay, this is what it's going to be like. You know, so you got to be prepared for that. So I think things like that are there, but I wouldn't say that there was, you know, a lot that was totally unexpected. I learned a lot about how you don't want to do our, large, remotely controlled airplanes. And loss of comm is an issue. Yeah.
There must have been some other like structural learnings you guys got from this. I would expect that the Boeing structural team would be all over this data, no?
No, I mean, this is part of the reason why Boeing pushed back on, it as a kind of science thing, which is that Boeing has investigated a shitload of airplanes, and we kind of know how aluminum fails and things like that. It would have been really interesting to do carbon, okay, but that wasn't, that wasn't really in the mix, right? So, for what you could afford. I mean, that was the thing. The other interesting thing I would say, in learning is that, that when you get the media guys involved, like there's all this money. I mean, this thing happened incredibly fast. Like money wasn't really an object and whatever, once they got the green light to do it, compared to if you've been trying to do some science-based experiment, writing proposals to NASA or whatever to do this, it would have taken forever. So it is interesting to see how different parts of the world will work differently. And, for them, it's just like, okay, get it going. So like, literally a month, you go crash it right now. So, yeah.
Is there anything interesting about the cleanup and how long did it take?
Yeah, so we had we had like 18 hours, and then we had to get it cleaned up. They had a contract with somebody, a Mexican outfit, okay, who did the cleanup for free and kept the airplane and sold it for the metal value, okay, for the scrap value of the metal. But we had, like I said, to clean up the thing. To be honest, I didn't stick around for all of the cleanup. Yeah.
Is the 727 a little stronger than the latest airliners? Because,
Yeah.
with time, people figured out how to take structure and cost out, so.
No, if you look at it, it's actually an interesting thing. So we're way over designed. I mean, 727 is a tank, okay? And even 737s are way over designed. So, when they did winglets on the 737, okay, the reason why they could do winglets on the 737 is that they had over-designed the structure so that, what a winglet is, it's just like it's like a wingtip extension. So they had an over-designed structure so that they could add additional effective span, and the wing root bending moment would still be within margin because the analysis techniques are a lot better. That's actually why, if you look at it, the Airbus winglets are not as big as the Boeing winglets because they didn't have. Airbus was designed later and had less structural margin, right? And this is really due to the uncertainty in the time. So this really is a strong airplane as a tank. More modern airplanes would probably be a little bit less structural. Yeah.
Can you also about the difference between plane then and now? So you said you shut down the number 20 with water.
Yeah.
Like, I thought in another accident they wasn't able to shut down the water, have to use foam to shut it down. So was the engine less or more susceptible to water at that time?
Well, it's a lower bypass ratio engine. Okay, so it may have been, and I actually wasn't there when they shut down, but that's not that uncommon to do. And the engine wasn't at full thrust, right? So it depends on the thrust level. So so they were able, like I say, just to shoot water in the engine and shut it down. Other questions? Good. All right. Thanks, guys.